Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another little fireside thing here. No beer. As you can see, this is all natural. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because of the fact that this has to be a separate video, and we actually have a decent chunk of stuff to cover. We beat a bunch of bosses. I went off and beat Dark Beast Parl. I will not necessarily be discussing his lore due to the boss's lore isn't necessarily important to the overall story of Bloodborne, in my opinion. Now, we did beat three important bosses: Marta Ligarius, Mikolash, and Murgo's Wet Nurse. And we will be wrapping up the story of the Thumerians here. We're gonna go in order. We're gonna tackle Marta Ligarius first. Marta Ligarius was actually originally there to. I believe he was originally there to kill the Queen, Annalise, but he was failed to do so. So he ended up just guarding her entrance. And I believe he's a Vile Blood. He's controlled by the Vile Blood. And Annalise is the last of the Vile Bloods that are still alive. There is one that we will meet later on, but she is not alive. Also, there is an item in the game called the Noble's Dress, which is in reference to the Vile Bloods, and that dress can be found elsewhere. The Queen Annalise herself, I am unsure why she's wearing that metal mask in particular. Um, we just, I'm assuming it's to prevent her blood from getting on anyone else, but obviously we partake in that. Alfred is his name. Alfred will kill her if you do his quest here. However, you can revive her by beating Abradus and using that altar to revive her. That is the importance of Abradus. Abradus was a part of the experiments that were done by the Healing Church. She is a great one that was trapped up there. And it is originally believed that her and Rom were supposed to originally have a connection to each other, but as far as I can tell, there isn't really. If anything, I could see Abradus being a tie to Bergenworth, and not necessarily the Healing Church but her placement doesn't let that make much sense. Now, that's kind of done with the whole Castle Canehurst area in general. We won't really be discussing Queen Annalise again. Her quest is kind of until we get to the DLC again with one particular character that we have not discussed yet on the channel necessarily. Now, on to Megalash. Mikolash is the host of that nightmare. When we kill him, also, by the way, Cosm is a character we will get to once we've beaten the DLC. But Mikolash is actually dead in the real world. This dead body that we go up to and touch, that is Mikolash's real self inside of the One Reborn's nightmare or whatever. I'm going to assume that his real self got trapped in the One Reborn's nightmare, and then from the One Reborn's area, then Mikolash transcended and hosted his own nightmare. But Mikolash is dead. And Mikolash doesn't actually know that when we defeat him. That's why he says he's going to wake up from this dream. He's not. He's dead. He's actually dead. And after his boss fight, you immediately see the Shadows of Yharnam. The Shadows of Yharnam guard the Great Ones. First time we see them being outside of Rom's area, outside of Bergenworth, and that area is guarding Rom, the Racious Spider, which she is a Great One. And also we can see them outside of Murgo's Wet Nurse, and she is a Great One. We'll get to Murgo in a second. Here's my only issue with this. Abradus is a Great One. How come there aren't Shadows of Yharnam guarding her? Also, we will see a Great One, a true Great One later on. How come Shadows of Yharnam aren't guarding them? It's a little bit suspicious here, which is why I don't necessarily subscribe to that reasoning necessarily, but it does make the most sense as to why they reappear. Now, also something to think about here is Murgo herself. We do literally fight a crib. Murgo is a formless child, but is Murgo in terms of Great Ones, Murgo is relatively He's basically a child, Great One, essentially, and I think it's actually tied to another great one that is mentioned throughout Bloodborne, but not necessarily discussed, called Odin. Odin, the Formless One specifically. The Tomb of Odin, which is where he fought Gascoigne. Odin is also mentioned in some Cathedral Ward related items as well, but it was one of the great ones that is extremely elusive in the lore of Bloodborne as far as I can tell. So here's what happened to the Sumerians. So the Great Ones wanted to have a child. They wanted to be able to reproduce, but the Great Ones cannot reproduce amongst themselves, so they needed a vessel to reproduce with. Now, what happened was the Sumerians chose the Sumerian queen in order to have help the Great Ones have that child. And unfortunately, a lot of things started to happen to the people, to the Sumerians, that wasn't intended. So the Sumerians ended up rising up. Well, another beast plague happened basically, and the Sumerians rose up against the queen, ripped out her child. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, that child is Murgo's wet nurse. That is that child that we kill. And that's why that the Marian Queen is the lady in the white dress with the blood stain on her. That's why she's looking at that boss arena, because that is her great one. That is her child. That's there. That was the great one. I believe that since the great one doesn't have a face or necessarily particular form in the crib, I think that the great one that impregnated the Sumerian queen was Odin, the formless one. I believe that he was the one that impregnated her and in turn causing those events to happen. Now, Wilhelm knew this. Wilhelm knew this, and that little latch that's under Bergenworth, that is where the Chalice Dungeons are. That's where they are, and those Chalice Dungeons is actually the Chalice Dungeons are the ancient Thumerian society, and Bergenworth was because this was a long time ago. Bergenworth, so Thumerians has descended into ruin after I would assume at least hundreds and hundreds of years. Bergenworth was eventually built on top of that after discovering the Thumerians. Then Yarnum and Cathedral War were built around that. Now, that's also why we hear a baby crying throughout Mikalesh's nightmare, because Myrtle is the host of that nightmare. She's basically being taken advantage of by Mikalash, and that's also why her theme is chimes. Her theme is chimes, and I'm still not sure of the significance why Gascoigne's music box is that way. I'm assuming I believe it's more of an Easter egg to what's to come, because technically speaking, Margot's Wet Nurse is an ending to a game. Is an ending to the game, and before the DLC, she really was the second. She is the first she is the last absolutely required boss for all endings. I personally don't subscribe to the ending that she ends with, but all the endings are in relation to how you treat Garamond and what you do after that, which we'll discuss too when we get there. But I believe since Murgo is basically the end of the game, I think the chime being at the beginning is sort of a sign that's like it's come full circle. The reason why you are starting at this adventure is because of what happened to Murgo in the past. So everything is set in motion due to past events that you have no knowledge of when you start the journey, but at the end of the journey, you should have at least surface level knowledge of. The knowledge is extremely expanded upon in the DLC, though. Now let's talk a little bit about that little cutscene. I didn't think that that amygdala was going to reference Kaza like that, and also normally that amygdala has a male voice, but that time it was a female's voice. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was pretty sure that that voice was male most of the time that I've handled it. But also under normal circumstances, I start the DLC and fight Ludwig at around the time Mikolash comes around. I usually beat Mikolash and then do the DLC and then come back to Marcus Wet Nurse. But even sometimes I do the deals. I do at least some of the DLC first, then do Mikolash. Where that amygdala sends us to is to the Hunter's Dream. The hunter's dream is set up by cause. I won't really get into why until as you'll kind of understand why as we progress through the story, but it really is not until we beat the final boss of the DLC where everything will be truly be explained. But all the hunters you see there, every single last enemy, every single last boss, there eventually became drunk on the blood. After a certain point, Kaz basically cursed over everyone for its own reasons. That like, hey, you get if you succumb to the blood, you are getting sent here. You're getting sent here now. So all those hunters there succumbed to the blood and got sent to the Hunter's Nightmare, where they will forever hunt and be hunted as well. You pretty much be forever in a frenzied state. It's basically torture, as you'll find out from the first boss, Ludwig the Holy Blade. You'll find out that it is torture to be stuck there, and that's kind of going to be the start. For the next episode, I do plan on attempting to, at the very least, get past Lady Maria. I'm really hoping to be able to get that much done. I legitimately do not know if I'm going to be able to do that. Um, we're gonna hope for the best, but yeah, that's kind of it. I apologize again for the inconvenience. I still do not know if I'm gonna have to test it and mess it around, but hopefully we'll be back to the norm in a future episode. But on that note, I will catch y'all on the flip side.